being here today. You all know better than anyone that one of the most important and challenging things that leaders do is to change mindsets. Those of you involved in the Pritchard Committee in the early days knew that was one of the greatest challenges that you faced, and you did it so excellently. Bob Sexton and Susan Perkins-Weston, or Susan, there you are. You knew that was the job when you created the Top 20 by 2020 report to say, why not? Of course Kentucky can be in the top 20 or the top 10 or further. It's what Dr. Carol Johnson did as superintendent of Memphis City Schools when she put banners all over the city that proclaimed Memphis City Schools, every child, every day, college bound. It's about changing mindsets and changing the strategies so that students, all students, can achieve at high levels. Bridget shared with you about the basics. I'm so glad that we're starting today with the first, with bold leadership, because you'd be hard-pressed to find the rest of them. The basics, you would not find them if you do not have a strong leader and a leader who embraces the community and parents and students to make it happen for kids. I want to give you a couple places where you can find more information before we invite the panel up here. The Pritchard Committee, y'all know our motto is inform, study, and engage. So the first thing we're going to do is inform you. You have in your packets a one-pager, front and back, called Kentucky School Leadership Landscape. I want to thank Jenny Adams from the Educational Professional Standards Board for helping us with this process, as well as Tom Shelton and a few others. Wanted to give you a view of what the data look like, what some of the emerging issues are in the field, and what some of the really strong initiatives are that are underway across the state. You'll see that Kentucky Association of School Superintendents has a new program called the Executive Development Program. It's through the National Institute for School Leadership. And Tom tells me they'll be expanding it into a superintendent's academy. You'll hear a lot more from Dave and Ron in a few moments about the Leadership Institute for School Principals that is led by the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce. Also wanted to make you aware of the Principal Partnership Project from the Kentucky Department of Education. Jenny Ray will be here today. I don't see Jenny right now, but she'll be here today. She's doing phenomenal work, really helping principals in a cohort model, providing on-site support. Jenny Ray was also my math teacher in high school, and she's awesome. So those are some important things. We will be publishing a report based on this information and based on today's discussion, so be watching for that. The sheet also gives you some reports that you can look at from some of our national partners, such as New Leaders, Public Impact, and others. Finally, after the panel has its discussion and we'll have some time for Q&A, we'll have a break, and then Bill Wilson will lead us in some group facilitated exercises so we can process what we've learned and provide recommendations back to the committee. So with that, I'm absolutely delighted to invite Dave, Ron, Gary, Jennifer, and Dr. Johnson to join us on the stage. Let's get started.
And then introduce our special panel this morning. I'm Dave Atkinson with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, and Bridget, I want to tell you publicly what I've said privately. We appreciate our valuable partnership with the Pritchard Committee on so many fronts. One of the publications that's back there is the Citizen's Guide to Kentucky Education, which we co-published earlier this year, and it gives, I guess, a 25-year history of some of the things that we've done. Bridget just described some of those. some of the achievements that have been made in Kentucky, but also some of the challenges that remain. So I hope you'll pick up one of those. Our chamber is primarily a policy organization working on behalf of the business community to try to create a better economic environment in Kentucky. So we have issues relating to taxes and environment and energy, and we work with the legislature, with the governor. Sometimes we're in the courts trying to pursue that. But the number one priority of our chamber was reaffirmed in 2008 by our board of directors, and that's the improvement of educational attainment in Kentucky. Our history goes back to pre-CARA days of when the business community was outspoken on behalf of improving education in Kentucky, back when the informal motto was, we're 49th and we're not going to take it anymore. Business leaders have been involved, but it is still the top priority of the Kentucky Chamber. A few years ago, we decided that it was not just enough for us to go over to the legislature and beat on the door of the governor and tell them to fix things in education. We needed to roll up our sleeves and do something also. Diana Taylor, who's a consultant to the Pritchard Committee and a consultant to our chamber. There's a lot of inbreeding here on our consulting work, but Diana knows when to put one hat on and the other. But she looked all over the country at the types of things that businesses were doing for education. And there are a million things. You know, you could give book bags to fifth graders, you could give laptops to middle schoolers, you could send an apple to the teachers on Appreciation Day. You could guarantee a 13th and 14th year to your students who do well in high school. A million things you could do. We had to decide what we could do, what was within our power, within our price range, frankly. And so we settled, after a fairly deliberate process, on school leadership, principal leadership. And we decided to put some of our eggs in that basket, and we have now done that for 6 years. We looked across the country for a partner, and we came down to two. The Center for Creative Leadership in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Harvard's Graduate School of Education. We decided to partner with CCL, the Center for Creative Leadership, because their instruction is all about leadership. It's all about you, your strengths, your weakness, how you motivate a team, how you motivate a faculty, how you get better student scores. It was not a graduate school of education that obviously has an education bent, which is a great thing. We wanted to go with the pure leadership, plus some of the top corporations in Kentucky, Brown-Forman, Toyota, Papa John's, the Corvette plant operation down in Bowling Green, use the Center for Creative Leadership for their up-and-coming executives and send them there. It's expensive. It was $9,000 per principal, but in the last 6 years, we have now sent 300 principals through that and invested about $3 million. Now, here's the class from July of this year, one of our two classes this year in Greensboro. They go there for 3 days. The next slide, Corey. We celebrated our 5th anniversary, brought people in from the Bush Institute in Dallas at the Presidential Library, and Laura Bush is all about principal leadership. Had some great speakers. Next one, Corey. So we've had 323 principals, $3 million, and there's some of the outcomes that we've reported. The principals come back and say, we've never had anything like this. It's wonderful. It's wonderful to be treated as professionals by the business community. It's good to have a pat on the back by business people who seem to care. So it's been very positive for us. That's the good news. The bad news is that we're probably sending half of the principals that I think we should be. You look at the turnover rate, I think we ought to be sending 100 principals per year, and it's just a matter of fundraising. It's hard. Another weakness is going into rural areas. You know, if you go into a county that has a grain mill and 2 branch banks and a service station, it's hard to raise the $9,000. We approach community foundations, we've had Rotary clubs, we've had individual businesses to do that, but we would like to do more. So that's a little bit of what we've been doing, just to make the point that our business community in Kentucky has made a strategic commitment to principal leadership as kind of our cause. So with that, I'd like to introduce our distinguished panel. The more I read about these folks, the more I wanted to hear from them, and I want to learn from them. Jennifer Carroll is with us. Jennifer is Project Director for Appalachian Leadership Laboratory. And they pull together leadership teams to work on how they can improve their leadership skills. And she's currently the president of the Kentucky Association of School Administrators. Corey, do they have this biographical material? Good. So I won't read all this to you, but just to highlight, Ron Chi, Dr. Ron Chi, he's on the board of directors of our Leadership Institute. By the way, the board is half CEOs and half education leaders of our institute. He served as a former, an advisor to former Secretary of Education Arne Duncan. He's got a tremendous background in innovation and how to scale innovation across schools. And he's currently the Chief Innovation Officer for Kentucky State University and the Frankfurt Independent Schools. So Ron, thank you for being here. And by the way, he's generally very enthusiastic. He's good to hear from. Not that the other three aren't, we'll see, but I think they are. Dr. Carol Johnson, an amazing background. Superintendent of Boston Public Schools, Memphis Public Schools, Minneapolis Public Schools. Have you ever had a real job or anything? It's amazing. But she's now Regional Executive Director of Programs with New Leaders. So she has studied leadership, especially at the urban school level, and brings that background to us today. And then, last but not least, I passed over, Gary Couchins. Gary is at WKU, and if I heard correctly, the Wallace Foundation has just done something amazing with you guys. I want to hear more about that, and I hope you'll address that. Yeah, Department of Educational Administration at Western Kentucky University, and he was just appointed to the state school board by Governor Bevin, so glad to have you on that school board. So, I understand the rules of this, and Corey will come up here and hit me in the knees if I don't do this right, is for me to kind of stir things and move it along. So Carol, we'll start with you. You have such a strong record of prioritizing school leadership as the superintendent in Memphis, Boston, and now helping districts throughout the region. How do you make the case that educational leadership and school leadership specifically is a priority? And what are the most important capabilities that effective leaders need? Dr. Johnson?
Okay, so thank you so much for inviting me. And let me start out by saying that I have been impressed for several decades with the work that Kentucky has led in terms of transformational work. And so I congratulate you and the Pritchard Committee in particular for really being on the forefront for quite a long time in addressing some of these important issues. I've been a school principal, and I think that times have changed. And the demands are very different than they were when I was a school leader. The demands for students, what we want in terms of outcomes, what we expect, what our community wants. It's very different than it was back when I went to the University of Minnesota to get a license to be a principal. I didn't go through some leadership special program, but there was a principal preparation program. So I think that second to the quality of teaching, the research has really said school leadership is by far the most important ingredient in terms of improving school performance. 97% of all teachers say that who is the principal matters in terms of them coming to a school, in terms of them staying in a school. And with the increased choice that families have always said that they make a decision about where to place their kids, where their kids are going to go to school, not just solely on how the building looks, but how they feel, how they're treated, whether they believe when they walk into the school that that principal is going to make sure that the school is safe, well run, and that the teachers are motivated and inspired. They know the names of the students. They're really connected. And so the whole set of skills that are really, really important in terms of building the kind of school leadership work. I will say that what I think has also changed is this. We've increased our focus on the lowest performing schools. And so while the kind of leadership programs that we traditionally had in the past met the needs of schools that were doing okay, I think that to transform the schools that have significant underperformance requires a set of skills and mindsets, a set of systems to be in place to get the kind of outcomes that we want for our poorest, usually in our most vulnerable children. And so when I came to Memphis, we invited a partner to join us in that endeavor, a program called New Leaders. And one of the reasons that we invited them was because of the elements that they had in place. One was a rigorous selection process where people had to really go through a process of being selected. And then secondly, there was a residency, not unlike a medical residency, for a whole year with one of our most talented principals. So working alongside somebody who really knew the work and had already evidenced success, so that we knew that they were being taught and modeled after a great school leader already, and they weren't just in school watching any principal, but they were learning in an environment. And then a lot of attention to 5 standards that we talk about, which have to do with instructional leadership being at the core, that the principal's job is really about creating the conditions where instruction is the top priority, learning is the top priority. A big focus on personal leadership. We believe if you, and this is tied back, I think, to your comments about the Center for Creative Leadership, if you don't know who you are, if you haven't developed yourself personally, you really can't lead anybody else. And nobody else is going to want to follow you either. Big focus on adult and teen. We believe that a lot of times people get promoted to being a principal because they were a great teacher, but they can't lead adults. And sometimes people get promoted to central office because they